So I guess I'd like to actually start this with a little bit of Q&A. I mean, this is around getting out of your, so this is really about, living an awake life. Like a lot of what brings us together is by the time people end up at a retreat, and really often by the time anyone ends up in even our entry level yoga healer courses, like the Yogi Detox, they've done like a buttload of work. We are not an entry level organization. And so by the time we get here, we've already actually gotten out of our own way a lot, right? But then it seems like an ever unpeeling onion, and there's more and more levels to getting out of our own way. Like you and I were talking about the element ether at some point today, and how like the beauty of Akasha is that it keeps expanding. Like there's no limits. And so when we start to live from a place that we're not self-limiting, right, and we have a mindset that's not inherently self-limiting, like what does that actually start to look like and feel like and smell like and taste like? Like what is that like? It's in my experience, a different use of space and time. It's a different use of fire as well. It's a different use of drive. It's a different experience of flow. And it's also a different experience of embodiment, reality, just something very much practical. So I wanted to give us a little time to explore this. It's something that I've been thinking a lot about. One of the I think it was actually a year ago here that we started to talk about awake living, and now it's becoming a course. And I think it happened here. I think I was frustrated with certain parts of the Living Ayurveda course, that I'm like, wow, that curriculum's really great, and it sets people up for this next curriculum, and it's not specifically career oriented, but it's a curriculum that has so much to do with the foundations of the philosophy or the constructs that we get from the Ayurvedic perspective, but it's not that, and it's something else, and it's very much life skills, very practical life skills oriented. And so that's just a little bit about what I want to just invite discussion, conversation. This is very casual right now. It's like really what is awake living to all of us? What brings us together in terms of the interests usually that bring us into this particular community is to be, like we've already done some serious work and woken up to that we are being in action, that we are consciousness, that we want to be the most awake version of ourselves, the least patterned version, the least, the word samskara just needs to be mentioned right now. And, that sense of being patterned that might be karmic for us, it might be relational from us, it might be ancestral for us, like who the hell knows, right? But we all have patterns that inherently rerun the record and create a repeat of the past. And we get to a point where we know the record, it's familiar, and it becomes more uncomfortable to hear it again. Has anyone noticed just even in the last few days, you caught yourself saying something and you're like, did I really? Me? Again? It happened to me yesterday. I'm like, Stillman, where? And it wasn't even a big deal, but it's like we have these patterns, and we become more and more refined in being able to catch a pattern that might have a limitation, that puts a limitation into the field, into the Akasha, into the space within us and into the space between us. So that's what this conversation is going to be a little bit about. And then I had this idea when Alex was doing body work on me yesterday, that I had this idea about the kleshas. It was part of the, when I was teaching the Anusara Yoga immersion curriculum. Who's gone through that? Anusara Yoga immersion curriculums? Yeah, okay, great. So in teaching that, I taught that I think about 4 times, each level 1, 2, and 3. Did I teach anyone in that? Was anyone? Yeah, I was gonna say, I think there's someone Oh, that was so fun. It's a great curriculum. And the kleshas are part of it. Do we have any yoga buffs here? Does anyone want to talk about the kleshas for a minute? What are the kleshas?
I know there's 5.
There's 5. Yeah. Yeah, just say whatever you know. We'll just pool our collective knowledge on the kleshas. And there are afflictions. Yeah, that's one translation as an affliction.
Like fear of death.
Fear of death. Attachment. Hatred.
Yeah.
Ego.
Attachment, aversion.
Yeah, that's it. That's those 5. Okay. So we have these afflictions, these stains. I studied both classical yoga and then tantric yoga philosophy. And in classical, like the classical yoga translation is basically like the kleshas are a problem. Right? They're like, they're stains. So imagine you're like the yogi wearing all white. And now you have someone spilled like red berry juice on the front of your smock. It's such a good word, smock. It's my French grandmother coming through. And now you have a problem. Because here you were like so holy and pure, and now you're stained. And like, and when someone walks up to you and you're like, hi, how are you? And they're just like, does she know she has the stain? And you're like, I have the stain. And it's all about the stain. And that's what a stain does, right? If you have a beautiful white smock on and a red berry stain. So the stains in classical are a problem. And in tantric philosophy, tantra in general tries to invert and make whole. And so they're an opportunity, right? It's where the obstacle becomes an opportunity. It's where, in many ways too, what I'm starting to see, and I'm not sure, I don't think I've learned this from anyone, but what I'm starting to see is that if we understand a little bit about the lower levels of development, like when we get to a certain level of practice, let's just take one of them. Let's take ego. That's one of the 5 stanzas. That's asmita. So ego's a problem. And we do a lot of work, especially in meditation, of letting go of the sense of the limited self. Right? And we start to let that go and let that go and let go. And at some point, usually, I don't know how long, 10 years maybe into meditation, it's actually a problem. The stain actually becomes the asmita. The stain becomes that we've actually let go of the ego so much that we're not like a rapper, like owning our shit, like owning who we are and what we're doing. So no one can actually access consciousness through us because we're just so, I don't know who I am, right? We're so dissolved in that self sense. So the first level in many ways is to, like you have to do the work if you're an egoic asshole, and it's a problem for everybody, right? If you don't know your own patterns, if you don't know your own samskaras because you're so wrapped up in them, that's a problem. But what I found in leading this community is that like, that's not our problem. And that's why all this worthiness, like my God, the worthiness, right? Like it just comes up in everybody's stuff, right? Why? Because it's like, well, if we were actually to pause and own, and really own what we know, who we are, the transformations we've gone through, our own journeys, our own stories, our own befores and afters, those are all location points for everyone else to be able to access something great through you, to really access Dharma, your Dharma, through you. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's one. Another one is ignorance, avidya. So avidya is knowledge, is wisdom. Avidya is being blocked from that, being cloaked from that. So in the path of yoga, at some point we realize that like there's no way we can know everything. Like my daughter, she's 8, and so she's like trying to figure out who knows everything. Like it's a big world, right? And so there's this sense at first of like when you think you know everything, it's a problem. I was a know-it-all, like from when I was her age, and she's a know-it-all too. But I was just trying to think of like one of my nicknames, and it was like know-it-all. It was just like Katie's a know-it-all. It was, my siblings always said, "You're a know-it-all." Like that was it just became associated with who I was. I'm like, well, I'm smarter than you guys. Fuck, like, sorry. I just know more. And I was always right. And I definitely was right a lot of the time, right? But it becomes a problem at some point, especially for people who are I'm a very rapid, my brain works really fast. What is that called? Like there's slower processor and there's fast processor. I'm a very fast processor. If someone tells a joke, I usually get it really fast. It's like, at some point it's a problem. And this is part of the teaching of avidya. So part of my path was letting go, becoming curious again, not knowing, realizing that I'm never going to know most of what is going on, and none of us will, but in that, there is a connection back to source, right? And that's the classical teaching. Then this next level is actually, how do you own what you know? How do you live what you know? And this is so hard. This is so hard. And it's something that's often not talked about that much in spiritually oriented communities where there's a seeking path. And actually the whole sort of capitalist economic structure of seeking communities is built that the seeker will continue to seek, right? And go to the next training and the next workshop and the next and the next and the next, right? But what happens in that is it creates a perpetual student instead of actually training the person to become the wise elder. And so I just invite you as I'm talking to note like that which is now like where the stain needs to be inverted, where it needs to be owned, where it's like, hey, this is my mark, like this is who I am.
My badge of honor.
It's my badge of honor. I like it. Exactly. So what do you need to know in terms of, own in terms of what you know? And again, then other people can actually find you through that. When you start to teach what you know, you enter a whole other level of knowing. When you start to live what you know, no excuses, like the non-negotiables, you enter a whole other level of integrity. The seeker, avidya, like I don't know, right? What happens is they're never accountable for that which they've learned, for the lessons the grace of the guru they've, received, right? They're never accountable for the lesson, the life lesson. And so they have to learn the life lesson again, and again, and again, and again. And they're back in samskara. All right, the third one, raga and dvesha they're a couple, and this is desire and aversion. So in the beginning, what happens in the yogic path in general is that like our desires and our aversions are largely unconscious and they're often unhealthy, right? Like just go back to your pre-yogic path. Like, I mean, I remember what I was eating before. I'm like, really interesting. Where was that coming from? Like just a lot of conditioning, right? It was just sort of what I grew up with, and then it was what was college, and then a young adulthood, and it was just more or less conditioning. Right, so we start to look back on and food is a very natural attraction, right? Like what you're attracted to putting and creating your body out of. Super basic. We can also see that in terms of relationships, like what types of people we're attracted to. And the patterning that goes with it, like our parental patterning. Did you marry your mother or your father, right? Or do you date your mother or your father? Or like just looking back at like what, that stuff of like, oh yeah, I married my mom. Winston married his mom. You married your mom, yeah, right. So you start to see